ExamPrep.School. FLA All Lines Insurance Adjuster Exam, exam code INSFL-ALJ16. There are 4 practice exams in this series. This video covers Practice Exam 1. The first 20 questions are free. In this video, we will be covering the following major categories for Practice Exam 1. Casualty, liability insurance, fire and allied lines, health insurance basics, motor vehicle physical damage and mechanical breakdown, property and liability concepts, contracts, law and adjusting practices, residual markets, selected Florida statutes and rules. Let's walk through the format. I'll read each question and its choices. Let's get started. Question 1. Which section of an insurance policy defines the insurer's promise to compensate the insured for losses covered under the policy? A. Insuring agreement section outlining covered perils and the insurer's promise to indemnify losses. B. Conditions section specifying policy provisions, duties, and performance obligations for parties. C. Declarations section listing named insured policy period, coverage limits, and premium. D. Definitions section detailing the meanings of key terms used throughout the policy. A countdown circle appears in the top right. Once it completes, the answer is revealed. You can pause at any time if you'd like longer to think. If you'd like additional practice covering more topics, see the description for our book. The correct answer is A. The insuring agreement is the core section where the insurer's promise to cover specified perils and indemnify losses is defined. Reason B is not correct. Conditions outline obligations and procedures rather than the insurer's promise to pay covered losses. Reason C is not correct. Declarations provide policyholder and coverage details but do not state the insurer's promise to indemnify. Reason D is not correct. Definitions explain terminology and do not establish the insurer's commitment to cover losses. Question 2. Which of the following items would not typically appear on the declarations page of an insurance policy? A. Named insured's name, address, and additional named insureds if applicable. B. Insuring agreement outlining perils covered and promise to indemnify the insured. C. Policy identification details, including policy number and policy period. D. Coverage limits for each coverage form and corresponding premium amounts. The correct answer is B. The declarations page contains policyholder details, policy period, limits, and premiums. The insuring agreement appears in a separate section. Reason A is not correct. Named insured information is a standard feature on the declarations page. Reason C is not correct. Policy number and period are core elements listed on the declarations page. Reason D is not correct. Coverage limits and premium amounts are routinely shown on the declarations page. Question 3. Which statement best distinguishes a policy condition from an exclusion in an insurance contract? A. Conditions section detailing insured and insurer obligations, reporting requirements, and policy provisions, whereas exclusion section eliminates coverage for specified perils or losses. B. Conditions section specifying circumstances under which coverage is voided, whereas exclusion section lists supplementary coverage enhancements. C. Conditions section defining premium payment schedules and cancellation procedures, whereas exclusion section establishes mandatory policy endorsements. D. Conditions section identifying policy definitions and interpretive rules, whereas exclusions section limiting coverage to specified events. The correct answer is A. Conditions impose duties and procedural requirements on the parties to maintain coverage, while exclusions expressly carve out specific perils or losses that are not covered. Reason B is not correct. Conditions do not list coverage enhancements, and exclusions do not add benefits. Reason C is not correct. Exclusions do not establish endorsements, and conditions are not limited to payment schedules. Reason D is not correct. Exclusions do not define policy terms, and conditions do not handle definitions. Question 4. A homeowner's policy names Sarah Lee as the sole insured and lists a bank as mortgagee. Sarah's sister temporarily stores equipment in Lee's garage. Under this policy, who qualifies as an insured? A. The bank listed as mortgagee for its insurable interest. B. Sarah's sister while storing equipment in the garage. C. Sarah Lee is the named insured under the policy. D. Any relative residing in the household at time of loss. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is Sarah Lee as the named insured under the policy because only a named insured has full insured status. Relatives or mortgagees have different coverage statuses. Reason A is not correct. A mortgagee is covered for its financial interest, but is not defined as an insured under the policy definitions. Reason B is not correct. Sarah's sister does not qualify as an insured because merely storing equipment does not confer insured status without endorsement. Reason D is not correct. Relatives are insured only if they reside in the household, but the sister is not a resident household member. Question 5. A commercial property policy insures a building valued at $600,000 with an 80% coinsurance clause and coverage of $420,000. After a $100,000 partial loss, what will the insurer pay before deductible? A. $52,500. B. $100,000. C. $75,000. D. $87,500. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is $87,500 because the coinsurance requirement, 600,000 multiplied by 0.8 equals 480,000, yields a coverage ratio of 420,000 divided by 480,000 equals 0.875, and 0.875 multiplied by 100,000 equals 87,500. Reason A is not correct. Applying a 52.5% ratio miscalculates the coverage to required ratio. Reason B is not correct. Assuming full loss payment ignores the coinsurance penalty on underinsured value. Reason C is not correct. Multiplying the loss by a 75% ratio uses an incorrect coinsurance percentage. Question 6. Which piece of information is essential for an adjuster to obtain during the initial claim notice intake? A. Insured's social security number. B. Date and time of loss. C. Adjuster's preliminary liability assessment. D. Insurer's internal file reference number. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is date and time of loss, because it is the foundational detail required to initiate the investigation and accurately record when the incident occurred. Other items listed are either protected personal data, later phase assessments, or internal codes not collected from the insured at first notice. Reason A is not correct. Social security number is private information not required for initial claim intake and is generally protected by privacy laws. Reason C is not correct. Preliminary liability assessments are performed later in the investigation and are not part of the initial information gathering. Reason D is not correct. An internal file reference number is an administrative identifier used by the insurer, not information collected from the insured. Question 7. Which combination of information must an adjuster verify on the coverage verification checklist? A. Coverage limit and adjuster's signature. B. Coverage limit and insured's date of birth. C. Policy number and policy period. D. Deductible and adjuster's telephone number. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is policy number and policy period, because a coverage verification checklist is designed to confirm the insured's policy identification and the effective dates of coverage. Other combinations include details not standard to coverage verification or elements documented elsewhere in the claim file. Reason A is not correct. Adjuster's signature is recorded in other claim documents but is not a coverage detail to verify. Reason B is not correct. Insured's date of birth is not a coverage detail documented on the verification checklist. Reason D is not correct. Adjuster's telephone number is not a policy coverage element and is maintained for contact purposes. Question 8. An adjuster is preparing the investigation scope statement for a newly reported claim. Which element is essential to include to ensure the scope clearly defines the investigation boundaries? A. A broad summary of the policy coverages under review. B. A specific list of investigative tasks and objectives. C. The estimated reserve amounts for each alleged loss component. D. A detailed roster of every potential witness to be interviewed. The correct answer is B. The investigation scope statement should clearly define the tasks and objectives guiding the investigation boundaries so that all parties understand the intended focus and limitations. Reason A is not correct. A policy coverage summary is part of coverage analysis but does not establish the investigation's scope boundaries. Reason C is not correct. Reserve estimates are financial projections made later and do not define investigation limits. Reason D is not correct. Listing potential witnesses may occur during planning but does not set the investigative objectives and tasks. Question 9. After conducting a recorded interview with a claimant, which action best preserves the recording's integrity and admissibility? A. Document the date, time, and participants and secure the original audio in the claim file. B. Replace the recording with a written summary to prevent verbatim errors. C. Provide the claimant with a copy before securing it to verify accuracy. D. Store the recording in a shared network folder accessible to all staff. The correct answer is A. Preserving the chain of custody requires documenting metadata date, time, participants, and securing the original recording in the claim file to maintain integrity and admissibility. Reason B is not correct. Summaries lose verbatim content and risk altering claimant statements. Reason C is not correct. Releasing the recording before secure storage risks, tampering, and chain of custody issues. Reason D is not correct. Unrestricted shared storage fails to protect the recording from unauthorized access or alteration. Question 10. An adjuster is drafting a reservation of rights letter to a claimant. To satisfy good faith notice requirements under Florida statutes, what content must be clearly explained in the letter? A. The specific policy provisions and potential coverage defenses being reserved. B. A full estimate of the damages that will ultimately be paid. C. A proposed timeline for claim investigation and closure. D. A confidential list of factors that could impair coverage. The correct answer is A. A reservation of rights letter must inform the claimant of the exact policy provisions and defenses that may limit or deny coverage, ensuring the insured receives clear notice of coverage risks. Reason B is not correct. Estimating damages is part of claim evaluation but not a required element of good faith notice. Reason C is not correct. Timelines aid claimant expectations but do not fulfill legal notice of reserved policy defenses. Reason D is not correct. Listing confidential factors does not satisfy the requirement to identify actual policy provisions and defenses. Question 11. Under Florida law, before placing insurance with a surplus lines insurer, a surplus lines broker must make a diligent effort to procure coverage from at least how many authorized insurers? A. 2. B. 5. C. 4. D. 3. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is that brokers must solicit at least 3 authorized insurers before placing with a surplus lines insurer, as required by Florida surplus lines placement criteria. Reason A is not correct. Soliciting only 2 authorized insurers does not meet the statutory threshold of 3 required attempts. Reason B is not correct. Soliciting 5 insurers is more than necessary. Florida law specifies a minimum of 3. Reason C is not correct. Requesting quotes from 4 authorized insurers exceeds the minimum requirement, which is 3. Question 12. In a reciprocal insurer organized under Florida law, which of the following best describes the role of the attorney-in-fact? A. Acts as a guarantor of subscribers' obligations. B. Represents subscribers in negotiating all reinsurance treaties. C. Manages and administers the reciprocal insurer's policies and operations. D. Enforces statutory capital and surplus requirements on subscribers. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is that the attorney-in-fact is appointed by subscribers to manage and administer the insurer's policies and operations under a reciprocal insurer structure. Reason A is not correct. The attorney-in-fact does not guarantee subscriber obligations. It administers operations on their behalf. Reason B is not correct. Negotiating reinsurance treaties may occur, but it is not the attorney-in-fact's primary statutory role. Reason D is not correct. Enforcing capital requirements is a regulatory responsibility, not a function of the attorney-in-fact. Question 13. After repeated underwriting refusals in the voluntary market, Javier applies for personal auto liability coverage with the Florida Automobile Joint Underwriting Association under Florida's residual market plan. Which of the following best describes how Javier's policy is assigned to a member insurer? A. Based on a published alphabetical rotation schedule of member companies. B. Proportionally according to each member insurer's voluntary personal auto market share. C. Randomly by lottery among eligible member insurers at that time. D. To the insurer that most recently declined Javier's application. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is that Florida's residual market plan apportions assigned risks in direct proportion to each member insurer's share of the voluntary personal auto market, ensuring no single carrier is overburdened with high-risk policies. Reason A is not correct. Florida's plan does not use an alphabetical rotation schedule to distribute assigned policies. Reason C is not correct. Assignments are not made by random lottery but follow a proportional market share formula. Reason D is not correct. Assignment is not influenced by which insurer most recently rejected the risk. Question 14. A startup insurer writes only 200 coastal property policies in its first year and experiences wide swings in loss outcomes. In year 2, it expands to 20,000 similar coastal property policies. Which result most directly demonstrates application of the law of large numbers? A. A wider spread of loss ratios appears across individual policies. B. The total dollar amount of losses rises compared to the first year. C. The ratio of actual to expected losses converges closer to 1.0 than in the first year. D. Variance in average loss per policy remains the same despite the larger portfolio. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is that as the number of similar exposure units increases, the ratio of actual losses to expected losses tends to converge toward unity, illustrating the law of large numbers. Reason A is not correct. A wider spread of individual loss ratios contradicts the convergence effect described by the law of large numbers. Reason B is not correct. Total losses will naturally increase with more exposure units, but this does not illustrate the law of large numbers. Reason D is not correct. The variance in average loss per policy typically decreases rather than remains unchanged when exposures grow. Question 15. Under Florida law, what is the maximum personal injury protection PIP benefit payable per person? A. $5,000. B. $20,000. C. $15,000. D. $10,000. The correct answer is D. The maximum PIP benefit payable per person is specified by Florida statute as $10,000 covering 80% of medical expenses and 60% of lost wages up to the limit. Reason A is not correct. This amount is below the statutory minimum for per person PIP benefits in Florida. Reason B is not correct. Florida PIP does not set a $20,000 per person limit under the standard coverage. Reason C is not correct. No statutory provision establishes $15,000 as a PIP benefit limit per person in Florida. Question 16. Which of the following is excluded under the Part A liability coverage of a standard personal auto policy in Florida? A. Liability for bodily injury to others while using a non-owned vehicle. B. Liability for injuries the insured intentionally causes. C. Liability for property damage resulting from a covered accident. D. Legal defense costs for covered claims. The correct answer is B. Part A liability coverage excludes intentional injuries caused by the insured. It covers both bodily injury to third parties and property damage from covered accidents, including defense costs. Reason A is not correct. Liability for injury while using a non-owned vehicle is covered under Part A when the vehicle is used with permission. Reason C is not correct. Property damage from covered accidents is included in Part A liability coverage. Reason D is not correct. Reasonable legal defense costs for covered claims are paid under Part A liability. Question 17. In an auto policy with split limits of 25/50 divided by 25, what does the 25 divided by 50 component represent? A. $25,000 combined single limit per accident for bodily injury and property damage. B. $25,000 total property damage per accident and $50,000 combined limit for bodily injury and property damage. C. $25,000 per person property damage and $50,000 per accident property damage. D. $25,000 maximum per person and $50,000 total per accident for bodily injury. The correct answer is D. In a 25/50 divided by 25 split limit, the first two numbers define the bodily injury limits, $25,000 per person and $50,000 per accident. The third number is the property damage limit. Reason A is not correct. A combined single limit refers to one overall limit, not a split of per person and per accident amounts. Reason B is not correct. The 25 divided by 50 values apply specifically to bodily injury limits, not to property damage or combined limits. Reason C is not correct. Split limits do not allocate separate property damage amounts as the first two figures. Question 18. Under a Florida personal auto policy, liability coverage automatically extends to cover accidents occurring in which jurisdictions beyond Florida? A. Worldwide, including all international waters. B. United States only. C. United States and Mexico. D. United States, its territories, and Canada. The correct answer is D. Florida's personal auto policy extends Part A liability coverage throughout the United States, its territories, and Canada automatically. Other areas are not included without specific endorsements. Reason A is not correct. International waters and global coverage require separate endorsements and are not automatic. Reason B is not correct. Coverage is broader than just the United States. It also includes territories and Canada. Reason C is not correct. Mexico is not automatically included under the standard Florida policy extension. Question 19. Which of the following events triggers the requirement to file an SR-22 form under Florida's financial responsibility law? A. Multiple parking violations within a year. B. Failure to renew vehicle registration. C. Conviction for driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. D. Minor traffic infraction with no damage. The correct answer is C. A conviction for driving under the influence is a statutory trigger for the SR22 filing requirement under Florida's financial responsibility law. Minor infractions or administrative renewals are not triggers. Reason A is not correct. Parking violations are not covered events that mandate an SR22 filing. Reason B is not correct. Failure to renew registration does not trigger an SR22 requirement under the financial responsibility law. Reason D is not correct. A minor infraction without damage does not activate the financial responsibility filing obligation. Question 20. John carries uninsured motorist coverage limits of $50,000 per person on 2 owned vehicles. Following a collision with an uninsured driver, his medical expenses total $40,000. Under Florida stacking rules, what is the maximum benefit John may recover? A. $100,000. B. $50,000. C. $150,000. D. $200,000. The correct answer is A. The correct answer is $100,000 because Florida law permits stacking of limits per vehicle owned unless stacking is rejected in writing. So two $50,000 limits combined $100,000. Reason B is not correct. Assumes no stacking and only one vehicle limit applies. Reason C is not correct. Overestimates stacking to 3 vehicles instead of 2. Reason D is not correct. Misapplies stacking by quadrupling limits instead of doubling. Enjoyed this practice test? Tap like, hit subscribe, and share it with a classmate. Got a question we should tweak? Comment below, we read them all. Find full practice exam books in the description or at ExamPrep.School.